Okay, so now I want to really shift gears. I'm really shifting gears away from focusing on the book itself, though I try to keep the picture of the book there to remind me. That's why I put the picture of the book here, to keep reminding me that I'm still talking about the book and not to get too far away from it. Because what I want to do in the rest of, mostly the rest of the lectures, is to add a level of data that I don't think was in the book. I think Frankopan, it's not a critique. It's a acknowledgement of his perspective. He's a historian, and he's bringing that sort of story, well-researched story perspective of a historian. What I want us to do is to add some numbers to this. So I've got some numbers around GNI, gross national income, growth by country, region, and economy. And then I've got some interesting trade and investment statistics that I've dug up. Which was really interesting shipping perspective statistics that I managed to find, and some FDI perspective that I want to bring up as well. And so FDI, foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment is really what a lot of this Belt and Road is all about, right? And so I think we really need to think about foreign direct investment. I'm also going to get away a little bit from the book for just a moment and then define foreign direct investment and what it is, and flows and outputs and stock and that kind of thing, just in case you don't know, because that's also really important for understanding what's going to be going on here. So my data for all the rest of this, I actually pulled from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD. And the UNCTAD, which I don't think you can say is a word, is the most authoritative and reliable source of information about global trade and FDI and those kinds of statistics. It's a major clearinghouse for all of these statistics. Most of what you're reading in anything well researched is probably coming out of the UNCTAD data sets. And they're all freely available. So I actually recommend that's actually why I put it up and I put their logo up here big. I actually recommend that you go to their data sets and get them. You're not going to see it clean like I've presented here, though actually they will provide you with some very cleaned up data there that they present. They have their own infographics. I've built my own from their data sets, but you have to be pretty good at manipulating data. Most of it's in long form, but in order to what I'm showing you here is wide form data. So you have to be able to transform data and that kind of thing. So it's not super easy to use, but if you're any good with that, it's an incredibly rich source of data for you on sort of economic level trade statistics. Okay, let's first look at gross national income, GNI growth by country. Okay, the United States still dominates the world in terms of the size of its economy. And I thought that's a really important place to start with here. Let's not forget, when we say the rise of Asia and all of those kinds of things, that no country anywhere is close to the GNI of the United States. And that may change. Whether or not the United States falls, or whether everybody catches up, or how any of that works, but that's true. However, look at this chart, right? It was sort of unquestionably, if you will, that just even like what 2004. Look at 2004. Look at China in 2004. It was just sort of with the pack, right? It was starting to emerge from the pack a little bit, but. This is the world's largest 15 economies, right? And so now if we back up to 1990, I don't even think it shows China much. I don't know if I had data in 1990 for China. I think it sort of just peters out there. But so China was not a major economy. So from 1990 to 2018, really it's amazing. The growth that we've seen in China, nothing else, to the point now where China is clearly the second largest economy. And there is arguments that what I'm showing you here, now remember I was stopping in 2018, that's the last good data I had. there's arguments that when we start to see the 2021 data, that China is actually going to caught up to the United States on some measures. And remember that we're looking at economic value in US dollars at 2018 prices, right? So there's all sorts of things you could, if you looked at it in different ways, if you did your prices differently or that kind of thing. But anyways, the point of this chart is that the United States is clearly still dominates, but China is catching up in an incredibly rapid way. With Japan as the third largest economy sort of holding its place. We often forget that Japan still exists. But don't forget Japan. Don't forget that Japan still very, very much exists and is still very much the third largest economy in the world. Even though, their products are not nearly as household anymore, right? When I was growing up, it was Sony and Panasonic and all of these Japanese electronic companies were everywhere. Now, of course, they still dominate in the auto industry, maybe like they've never done before. But companies like Samsung and LG, these Korean companies, have maybe become more household names. But don't let that fool you. The Japanese companies have moved maybe a little bit more substantively into B2B products. Maybe more likely, let me give you an example, like maybe more like medical equipment, right? So what are the brand names for medical equipment? Well, I have no idea, right? And you have no idea, maybe you do. But a lot of those names are Japanese names, and that's huge business, right? And so they've gone sort of to that sort of extremely high-tech businesses and sort of next wave stuff. So anyway, we'll never count out Japan. So when we put Japan and China together, we'll see that regionally. I mean, that's an incredible force. Those two countries, which are not necessarily partnering extensively, but they could. The next thing I want to look at is Central Asia, because as I was saying before, we don't know I don't know a whole lot about Central Asia. It's not, their economies are not something that that sort of on our radar a lot, and even the names of some of these countries are become difficult to remember. So many of them end with Stan, right? And all the Stans we say, right? And we just don't get enough. In our own history lessons, in our own school, in our newspapers and all that, we just haven't been given a rich knowledge of Central Asia. I think that's got to stop now. I've sort of taken on myself to sort of throw off my ignorance of Central Asia and really take a much more serious look at it. The last Frankopan book was actually a real fun way of doing that. And this one is too as well, right? Give us a little bit of insight into Central Asia. And there's some other ways there's some really nice material on Central Asia that's, is quite accessible. Now, in this particular chart, I'm going to go away from it in a minute because I've included India. And India, of course, dwarfs the rest of Central Asia, making them look, almost completely unsuccessful. I only wanted to start with that to give the idea of just how important India is to this region, right? India is the major player in below Central Asia, right? And it is. I've said Central Asia, India, and Pakistan because India and Pakistan are not Central Asia, but they're sort of right below there, sort of looking up at it, and so that's important. It's important to remember that India is absolutely no small player here. But I'm going to take India away now so that we can kind of have a better look at the rest of Central Asia, and clearly Pakistan is a major player once we pull India out, and Bangladesh, and then Kazakhstan as a major player in Central Asia, but we can see all of them are for the most part growing. So there is something to what Frankopan is saying here, right? That in order to go from go back, 1970s too long ago, but even from the 1990s to now, the growth of all of these economies, those lines are really steep, right? And that's actually why I blew it up here. That's why I got rid of India, so that we could sort of start blowing up these lines and giving you a sense of growth rates. And remember, growth is opportunity. So you guys are business people, and always keep in mind that growth is where you're going to find your opportunity, because you have market expansion, right? If the market is fully penetrated and growth rates in that market are low, well, then as a new player, what kind of opportunity you got? None, right? But if there's, if you're starting off small, but there's lots and lots of growth, I mean, you can get in at the ground level sort of thing, right? And this is what I want us to be thinking about Central Asia. So what I did then is took a couple of more countries away, and just so that we could see the much less developed countries. So we see Uzbekistan. Now there's a substantial correction there. I don't know. I don't have the data for 2019 or 20, so I don't know what that looks like or why that correction's there. Turkmenistan, and he talks about Turkmenistan in the book. He's I think he apparently he was there, and he has a bit of an affinity for them. But there's certainly he certainly has some funny anecdotes about Turkmenistan in the book that are some comic relief, I guess. But let's not take them. Let's not dismiss them, right? There is a substantive growth rate there, right? From near nothing to where they are now in 20 years. And I think that's what I really want you to take from these slides. And that's why I'm going in from including India and then taking out Pakistan and Bangladesh, sort of coming down. Let us see what the growth rates are amongst these very small economies in Central Asia, which seem to play a really important part of the book, and seem to have gained quite a bit of attention from China. And I think this answers some of those questions. Well, maybe it's a chicken and egg aspect, but is China interested in them because they're growing, or are they growing because China is interested in them? And I think that's part of this partnership, part of this sort of cyclical nature of what China's trying to be involved in with its neighbors. Okay, the next thing we can do is kind of look at GNI by economic type, right? So the economic type basically being the most developed, or the developed economies, the developing economies, and the transitional economies. Those are sort of transitioning to developing economies. And once again, it's not surprising us that the most developed countries still dominate the world's GNI. Western Europe, North America, the Anglosphere dominate GNI, but there's a sort of real substantive catch-up going on with the developing economies. Now, of course, China's in this group, right? But others are in this group. Brazil and Russia, India are all in this group, and they're starting to that's starting to narrow, right? In some sort of very real ways. If you look at the lines here, right, the lines are getting closer and closer together, and even though they are staying somewhat apart. It's the whole world is going up. Whereas just some years ago, if we go back, before the mid 1990s, right? The developing economies their development was much more flat than it has been in the 21st century. So another way to look at GNI in the context of this book is GNI growth by region. So let's sort of look at all the different regions. And I think this is the one that sort of really gets us, right? That the overall GNI of Asia as a region is now the largest, right? And I think that should hit home for you. That when Asia is all taken together, it actually represents more of world gross national income than any other region, right? So not then all of the developed economies put together, but certainly more than the North American region, right? Or the Asia, or I'm sorry, the North American region or Europe, right? Asia represents more than those regions. And that's powerful because if we go when did that cross, right? They crossed North America in sort of according to mine here, about 2008, they crossed North America. And then they cross Europe in 2010, right? So, and now over the past 10 years, there's been sort of no comparison. Now, just remember, you've got Japan in this as well, right? You've got in this region is China and Japan, right, representing the second and third largest economies in the world right now. But still, I mean, it's just fascinating, right? Just that how important Asia is going to become. We are already in the Asia century. So now the next chart that I put up, I got the data for GNI within Asia. So we saw what is all of this dominance of Asia that we're seeing now. And so let's look at GNI within Asia. And clearly, Eastern Asia dominates this chart because they have both China and Korea and Japan. So number 2, number 3, and number 10 largest economies in the world, sort of within East Asia. So let's pull out East Asia and look at sort of what's happening in the rest of Asia. So when we pull out East Asia, it really comes to light what's going on in Asia. We're seeing quite a bit of growth all through Asia, particularly now Central Asia. We've already sort of looked at the growth there, and the other aspects of Asia, though the other regions of Asia, are all growing kind of together, and with. Sure, India is dominating South Asia, and so they're above the other regions of Asia. But there's the trend lines are all there, right? And so I think once we blend out sort of economic size, we can see that sort of the rest of Asia is kind of going up all sort of together in their trajectory as a because this is not a per capita analysis, right? This is an overall analysis. So I think if we started doing some per capita analysis, in fact, probably Western Asia, the Middle East, is certainly its economic growth is quite strong given its per capita population, right? And I could have broken that out further to see. But my point here is not so much that though looking at per capita growths and those kind of things, but rather to see even the fundamental economic sort of importance of these areas, right? And so there's a lot to argue. There's a lot to argue here that the rise of Asia is very, very much important, and Central Asia, which is the idea is that does Central Asia now, with the attention that's being brought, a little bit by Russia and quite a bit by China and the rest of the Asian countries as they develop more relationships, do we start seeing this trajectory maybe in the next 10 years? Maybe Central Asia is the next 10 years, right? Where we start to see some exponential growth, and that's a possibility.